Hey everyone, welcome back. Super excited for this panel. Advocate, it's called Where Advocacy Meets Action, Driving Policy and Social Change for Equitable Futures. Um, we'll start by sharing the bios. Bayadir Mohamed-Osman is a Sudanese American social impact consultant, an author, a poet, public health professional, and community activist. She completed her master's in public health at Johns Hopkins University in 2023, break racking in over 1 million views on social media. Bayadir's moving messages, moving messages have been featured on multiple platforms such as PBS, Now This, AJ Plus, and the Washington Post. Her social justice-oriented poetry and activism have been showcased in dozens of cities throughout the USA. So super excited to welcome Bayadir, aka Baya, and Morgan Harper, for those who aren't familiar, is a lawyer, former congressional candidate, and was an elected delegate to the 2024 Democratic National Convention. She's the director of policy and advocacy at the American Economic Liberties Project, an antitrust organization that advises federal, state, and local officials on competition policy. Previously, Morgan served as a senior advisor to the first director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Morgan also co-founded the grassroots organization Columbus Stand Up, which facilitates political engagement among less consistent voting populations. Thank you again, Morgan and Bea. Super excited for this panel. How are y'all doing today? Happy Friday.
Good. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Doing great.
Awesome. Well, so I guess just on a high level to kind of start off, I think it's been a interesting, year, obviously, in terms of political, in terms of just just all the things moving around the world. So I guess just, to level set the conversation, since both of you, work in this, on a day-to-day basis, how do you find a way to really find balance, and just I guess just see the light in all of this, and then also how do you look forward to maybe or 2025, and you could answer that however you want to.
I can start. So yeah, I mean, Manny, you're right. I think we've all been living through a tumultuous time, and depending on how old you are, kind of just tracks for how long it's been tumultuous. I mean, I think for a lot of us, it might, if we're in the elder millennial side of things, we might be saying the starting point would be the early 2000s and the Iraq War. And then if you're maybe a little younger than that, maybe the starting point of feeling some tumult would be the financial crisis and the Great Recession. And then, of course, more recently, the pandemic has certainly led, and I guess what I would say all of these events have in common is that it's led a lot of us to question the government and whether or not the government's looking out for our best interests, and what kind of government role do we even want? And so, I think the culmination of this election too, was some kind of referendum on what people are looking for out of the government and what they feel like isn't working. And more than anything, if there's one clear message, it was this rejection of what is in place at the moment and wanting change. So in some ways, it's hard to predict what exactly comes from here, but what I am excited might be not the right word, but energized by is that more people than ever, it does feel like, are kind of aware of some things that aren't working and how a lot of us are being left behind in many ways that we'll define. And I think Diane and I both have different perspectives that we're bringing to that. And that's the key to any successful movement or advocacy goal or policy goal, is having an engaged set of the population that's willing to put some time and energy into changing something. And on that front, I think we're starting to have a lot more of those pieces in place to get the kind of change that we're looking for. And so I'm looking forward to this next phase.
Yeah, no. How about you, Bea?
Yeah, no, I would definitely piggyback off of Morgan's points of, like, we were all introduced to this resistance in a different way, whether it was the Iraq War or George Floyd. I think we all kind of had our trigger, but now I feel, you know, energized, as she says, and also determined, knowing that we have access to social media, technology, and those formal ways of making change are now becoming more accessible. So it's like you can make a TikTok video, you can go advocate within your community, at your barber shop. So I'm feeling the balance within myself, knowing that there is so many boundaries and obstacles we still need to determine to come over. But it's amazing knowing that it's all at our fingertips, and it's our friends and our cousins and our schoolmates who are with us on this journey. So it's not as alone as we thought.
I
Yeah,
love
I
that.
forgot
Yeah,
the balance point, but in my message on my holiday card this year is that rest up, but the fight resumes. So I do think that we all need to take a breather though, if we can, even
Yeah.
from social media, you know, over the next couple of weeks for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. Someone said yesterday it was like this was like a year of truth in a way, and now now we have a foundation in place in a way, so we'll see kind of where that goes. And a lot of people are taking rest on social media. I saw it recently, LeBron James did as well, but that might be a different story. But I guess for you all, how can grassroots efforts in policy advocacy really work together to drive systemic change?
Well, one example I'll point to just to kick it off. So, I work at this place called American Economic Liberties Project. We're a research and advocacy organization that's based in DC, but kind of working with folks all throughout the country. And I'm obviously here in Ohio. And our whole theory of the case is a big reason why we see a lot of this, like, increase in income inequality, economic inequality, is because all of the resources are being hoarded by a very small number of large corporations and the people who are investing in them and running them. And if we're going to change that, well, then we've got to start to break up some of that power to make sure we have, businesses of all sizes that are able to compete, that we as workers are able to earn more for what we're doing, and all of us are, able to actually, it's kind of the root of a strong community. And so, one of the grassroots efforts I would point to is that we did that can sound kind of frivolous, but it was a pretty cool example of people engaging, was our Break Up Ticketmaster campaign. So, people would say like Ticketmaster tickets, all the big issues in the world were like, why are y'all doing anything on ticketing? And it's like, okay, little issue to you, right? But if you're a music fan, or also not in a position to constantly go on vacation and get other experiences, like a live event, and whether it's music or otherwise, is a luxury that is accessible, or should be, right? But what's happened is Live Nation Ticketmaster has made a lot of acquisitions over the years. They have a lot of different business lines. And so they've become a monopoly. We started to see sort of organically a couple of years ago on social media. So again, to his point about the power of social media, people just complaining like, Ticketmaster sucks. I hate Ticketmaster. And you don't usually see people complaining so explicitly about a monopoly in the economy. We're like, let's do something with this. So we launched this coalition, Break Up Ticketmaster. We put it, just quick. I mean, no money, no funding to support this, just like put up a website. We got some different groups together to put their logos on the website. And we had a petition that anyone who wanted to could sign up and send a letter to the Department of Justice saying, hey, Live Nation Ticketmaster's out of control, break them up, sue them, get rid of this monopoly. And you never know where that's going to go. We put up a lot of different campaigns and things, but this one we put up 2 weeks before Taylor Swift launched her Eras tour. And that's when it all kind of exploded. So by the end, we've had over 100,000 individuals across the country who have sent letters to the Department of Justice Antitrust Division saying, break up this monopoly. And now we have seen that the DOJ just this year did file a lawsuit, and now is suing Live Nation Ticketmaster for being a monopoly, which likely, but not guaranteed, but very well could result in a change in their whole business model and cheaper tickets, more venues, independent venues that are able to survive, et cetera.
Love that.
Yeah, great
Love
example.
that.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
would.
Bea, I would love. Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, because you're doing a lot of cool stuff with Now Nights and different things. So yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks. I would, just to go back to the question, and like, thanks, Morgan, for the awesome example. I think in terms of grassroots is absolutely essential. The voices of lived experiences, they have the data, they have the evidence. You cannot just propose a policy or propose change if you don't have the evidence to back it up. And I feel like Morgan gave an example of that. Another one that comes to mind for me right now is, I'm sure, Manny, you see all my posts. There's a war in Sudan right now. It's been over 600 days. And unfortunately, a lot of global international organizations have not been able to enter due to the war. And I'm referring to UNICEF and the USAID. There's so many restrictions, and just for their safety, they've pulled out a lot of their staff and closed off their offices. So the work that I've been focusing on this year is with mutual aid groups in Sudan. Specifically, they're titled emergency response rooms. And these are youth, staff, volunteers in Sudan risking their lives. We send them the funds and they get it to who needs it. So that's another example of change is literally within the hands of the people. We cannot always trust and give our power over to the bigger organizations, because they've shown us in this crisis in Sudan, they were literally not able to get into the country or stay in the country. So when you pass it over, the resources and the power, to these local youth groups and the small villages, they know exactly how to get across this border. They know how to maneuver with this person. They know how to negotiate with this army, and they're able to actually be accountable to their community. And I think that's the really important part also with grassroots efforts, where, this is not a 9 to 5 to us. This is not you don't clock in, you clock out. It's when you're a part of social change and humanitarian work, it's a 24/7 type of role. And more importantly, you're accountable to your community. And they hold you at a high degree.
Yeah, and just building off of that, I think that's so true, because I think one of the things you're getting at is like the independence of the grassroots, right? I mean, so many players in the policymaking space and government or international development, they're getting paid by somebody to kind of think a certain way, or at least publicly make it seem like they believe a certain position. But grassroots is the people, and the people have no reason to lie because we're not making any money off of this for the most part. So yeah, I mean, I think that's why there's a real power there too, when you're talking about trying to facilitate any kind of movement, social change. And we see, like you mentioned, George Floyd, Occupy Wall Street. I mean, what was so powerful about these movements was that people knew they were for real, that they had no ulterior motive. It was like they just really believed, and they were willing to take their own time and energy and put themselves on the line. And that's hard to stop or argue with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just kind of piggybacking off of that, Morgan, I know you shared an example recently. I guess, there's people say a lot about volunteerism, and, right now that's a big issue. So for someone, who wants to give back in the community, wants to get involved, I guess what type of tips, strategies, do you recommend for them in terms of get involved locally in the communities they serve, or maybe if it's like you, Bea, and they want to impact the war in Sudan, and what are some actionable ways do you think that they could get involved?
Well, this is one of the things that I hope everyone takes away that should be so inspiring, and both from the examples we mentioned and then looking ahead, is pretty much how would I put it? Most people aren't willing to put their time into, a cause necessarily, right? Or we just have so much going on, it's hard to prioritize that. And so it ends up that in our society, and I think this holds around the world, though I don't focus as much on, international organizing, but is a small group of people can actually shift. And we've seen this in the US lately. I mean, a very small set of people are now controlling our politics and the outcomes of elections for better or worse, depending on your points of view. But that should be an empowering message, actually, to a lot of us that, well, if we get organized, we can shift things too. And so the biggest challenge to me in the charge to everybody is to identify what is that issue that you're willing to put some time into, and to really make some sacrifices to move on. And that is our only limitation. So, just very concretely, and I think that exercise of like deciding what is a priority for you, and then working backwards from there. Who has the power to do something about it? What are the ways to get in touch with them? How do you, like Bea was saying, how do you communicate with others in your community or in your networks? And now we are living in the social media age where your network could be defined globally? How can you connect with them and then put a little bit of a strategy together to start applying pressure on that target? That's really all it takes. That's, I mean, that, the Ticketmaster example, that's what I'm saying is like, we just put up a website and you get 100,000 people to say something. That's going to get some attention. So I think that is the challenge though, is like, identifying that issue and then being willing to just put some time into organizing your community around it. Yeah.
I 100% agree. It's really just up to the person in terms of like the only prerequisite, I believe, is just passion. I don't think you need to be super educated. I don't think you need to have a lot of money. I think it's just taking whatever skill that you have and being able to contribute it to the conversation and actionable steps. I always say when I do events and talk with younger activists, I always say to them, just do a bake sale, write poetry, do a Facebook post, whatever you are specialized in, whatever you have a skill in, you can use that skill in order to contribute. And like an example that comes to mind is even Ben and Jerry's. Nothing about politics, but they have been standing very firm on Palestinian rights and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza right now. So that's just one example. Regardless of what field you're in, you can use law, you can use poetry like I do, you can use public health, technology. Even the example Nile Nights that you brought up a little bit ago, that's party and entertainment and joy. We're using that as a vessel in order to move the Sudanese conversation forward. So regardless of what your specialty, your expertise, your education is, only prerequisite you need is just passion.
And just building off
I love that.
if I could add one more thing, Manny, because I think there's often this idea is like, we hear people say like, oh, the system's rigged, they're not going to listen to us, whatever. It's like, that is exactly what they want us to believe. Those that, again, this like small group of people that control a lot of resources that are preventing, more change that folks might want to see happen. And so we've got to get over that and beyond. And I think a lot of the tactics that I was mentioning are about like awareness raising, but then also like adding on to that, where is the point of power that can change things? Mentioning something like international affairs, I'm shocked by, I talked to a lot of young people that are really concerned about that. And I was like, okay, well, who have you talked to about it, right? Like what elected official who has power have you talked to about that? And then I usually get the question of, well, who is that? Who should I be talking to, right? So we also have to like understand our government, which, we don't always learn in school very clearly. So I say with all empathy, but we've got to start getting, especially in this moment where so much is up for grabs, where the whole future of our country and our world is really being determined on a daily basis. We've got to be smart, we've got to be concrete, and we've got to understand like what are the levers to implement the change that we're looking for.
Yep, they work for us is exactly what I was going to emphasize, that our elected officials work for us. We don't need them, they need us, and we need to be providing them the demands and our list of items that we want. So exactly, just reaching out to them and knowing where their office is, knowing their address, different things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, love that. I think it's important to, recognize the people that are doing the work, and before it's easy to reach out to someone like Morgan, someone like Baya, and see how you could add value to them. Or if you want to start your own, company, just figure out that how you could add value to all of these entities that already have kind of built a nice foundation. Morgan, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, for everyone who is familiar with your, you know, congressional and political runs, do you see another run in the future or anytime soon, or how are you looking at the next couple years?
We'll have to see how everything plays out, but in the meantime, organizing in Columbus and trying to get people to engage more in the political process. A lot of times people, after I lost, because I lost five, like, oh, Morgan, are you sad that you lost? I'm like, no, I mean, it's not fun to lose, but it's not that it's like a rejection of the ideas. This is all about political awareness and more people understanding who you are, what you're talking about, name ID, all these things are kind of the name of the game in politics. So our charge is to continue to organize our community so that we have a more diverse set of people who are showing up to vote, who are exercising their power, so that we get different outcomes in the political process. As long as folks are just kind of, again, deferring, well then, nothing's going to change. So, I mean, another quick example I just wanted to mention on that front of like, not candidate organizing, but on an issue is, we did this Stop AEP Rate Hikes campaign in Columbus. And that was, because utility prices, like all prices are kind of out of control now. but especially electricity, utility prices. And this is another one where people's like, okay, you know, we all hate paying these prices, but that's usually the end of the analysis, right? Where do you go with that frustration? Well, it turns out in every state and in Ohio, there's the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio that has absolute authority over deciding whether or not our electricity companies get to continue to raise prices. They have public hearings, people can show up to those public hearings, and we, again, just put up with no resources, little website, got some people in the community, show up to that hearing. And then by the end of it, AEP, who's our electricity utility, you know, voluntarily reduced how much they were asking to increase prices. So, you know, and that's, I think another thing that I hope people take away from this is like, oftentimes when you're organizing, you can be in like your issue silo. It's like, okay, so, you know, Baya's working on Sudan. That has nothing to do with antitrust or monopoly, or you're an environmental person, or you're a reproductive rights person. We all have to be kind of understanding these connections. So like, take, for example, utility. Every small business, every entrepreneur, I would think, should care about utility prices, because they're going to be paying these prices too, and it's going to be disproportionately higher for a business that's trying to get momentum to pay them than, you know, a large giant corporation. So just thinking creatively too there about what different members of your coalition could look like, I think is an important thing to keep in mind as well. So that was a really long way of saying I'm not answering your question, Manny, about whether I'm right.
No, I think I think more importantly, I think, you know, I was born in Columbus, so wherever you're from, especially if you're living there, I think it's invaluable to just look around and pay attention to the local leaders, the local nonprofits, the local tech startups, VCs, businesses, at least learn that, because, you know, we live in a world where you go local, national, global, and depending on what you're doing and depending on how many people like it can happen very quickly. So, you know, I think I just think it's very important to really pay attention to your surroundings, and um, because it, you know, a lot of the issues, even when I travel in the Midwest, you know, in these cities, a lot of the issues kind of look the same. I mean, like
Definitely.
literally the same. So I think, you know, that's a very, very valid point. Um, if anyone has any questions, feel free. I guess I'll just change the subject in a little bit, just in terms of with doing this work and finding balance, or also just staying, you know, I guess I would say staying sharp. You know, twofold question to both of you: how do you find balance in doing this work, and then also what tips, podcasts, books do you recommend for someone to really kind of stay sharp, and stay, you know, ahead of the curve? Bea, you could go first.
Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah, and I'll give a real an example of just, for instance, today. So today I was able to host a collaboration that I did with in Refugees International, and Don Cheadle, amazing actor. He helped us with this campaign video that highlights the United Arab Emirates involvement in the Sudan war and everything they're funding. And I remember just seeing the video and feeling so much emotion, because at the end of the day, like, this might be the products that's finally out. I get to post, like, check the item off the list, but at the end of the day, this is my family, this is my home. And realizing, like, I'm still human in all of this. And maybe to my colleagues, this just might be another item off their resume. But for me, this is like, you know, life or death for my family back home and for my future. So I think always remembering what the ultimate goal is, and allowing yourself to have grace and realizing that you're human and taking advantage of rest, because it is a form of resistance, and just not forgetting those roots. So that's just an example from today. Is I allowed myself to feel those emotions, I acknowledged them, and also knowing they will drive the work again when I start up again Monday morning. So allowing that to move me forward and not discourage me.
Yes, rest is so important. Shout out to Don Cheadle. It's awesome he's doing that.
Yeah, that is good. He's getting involved in that. Yeah, I would just add, I mean, yeah, rest, and then boundaries. I mean, making sure a lot of people waste your time, and they are comfortable with it if they're not trying to get a lot done. So just, you know, quickly evaluating who's trying to move things forward and who's just trying to swirl, I think is essential to be an effective organizer. And then that ultimately helps to feed into balance, because you are not frustrated or using your time in ways that aren't efficient. So I think that's something to keep in mind. In terms of, resources, I would recommend, I mean, we kind of think there's a monopoly problem everywhere. I mean, we should set up some separate time because I would love to identify them in the international space. But like, take, for example, I mean, some of these defense contractors, people who are manufacturing weapons, like that is an extremely consolidated space that the US government's getting gouged, actually just like handing our money over to them because there's no transparency, and then also having very harmful impacts across the world. Anyway, main point, there's a monopoly problem everywhere. If this is a newer topic for you, a book I would recommend is called Break 'em Up. So like break and then apostrophe EM up, by a professor named Zephyr Teachout. It's a pretty quick read, and it just goes through different market areas to talk through how there's a concentration issue, monopoly problem, and more importantly, policy solutions to do something about it. So that's a good one that I would recommend.
Awesome. Any podcasts in this space that you recommend? Because I think from someone, I'm in tech finance, it's hard to find just, I guess, partisan resources, right? I think it's kind of
Yeah.
hard there. So any news outlets or any information that you all recommend?
Well, I'll give a couple more and then I'll turn it over to Baya. So, and then Organize Money for Podcast is one that actually my colleague at Economic Liberties does. Organize Money with David Dane, and they're breaking down different market areas and how their concentration problems. And then our organization just launched a Substack called The Economic Populist, where we'll be diving into different issues every week, a couple times a week. So those are all, if you're more of a podcast Substack person.
Love that.
So mine is I'm not even Gen Z, but mine are so Gen Z. I feel like my recommendation is following people who are always covering these issues on TikTok and Twitter and Instagram, because the type of work I do is really fast paced. So I don't believe there are there's not legacy media out there about what's going on in Sudan as detailed and as comprehensive as they need to be. So who I follow are people who do daily updates of what's going on in Sudan, but not just the Sudan issue. I would recommend anyone who is following any issue to get the local leaders, the community leaders, and follow them to see what they're posting on a daily basis, instead of always depending on like a legacy media, especially if it's an ongoing crisis at the moment. So that's my recommendation. I know I didn't answer the question.
No, I love that.
No, I
Yeah,
did.
I love that. And just with now nights like Baya Touch, they're doing local events, and I think one of the things that impressed me the most is how you were able to find those local boots on the ground and be able to send some resources to help them. So I really appreciate you both for joining and hopping on. Super excited for next year, and just staying up to date with everything you all are doing and working on. So thank you. Any final thoughts?
No, just really grateful to be here and hear more about. I want to actually just follow up with Baya directly.
Yeah,
so
same. No, we'll get in
Yeah.
touch. And I also
for
just
sure.
want to thank Manny. So folks like Manny who are bringing the community together, and local leaders. So I appreciate you, Manny, for creating this space for everybody and bringing folks together.